My name is Rachel Morgan. I'm 35 years old, and I've spent most of my life trying to be enough for a woman who never saw me that way. My mother, Evelyn, was the kind of woman people described as a force. She had presence, sharp eyes, quick judgments, and a tongue that could cut through steel. To the outside world, she was admired. But inside our home, her words often landed like grenades, shattering whatever peace remained. Christmas had always been complicated for me. As a child, I wanted what every little girl wanted: warmth, laughter, maybe a hug under the twinkle of the lights. What I got instead were constant comparisons. My older brother, Daniel, was the achiever. My younger sister, Claire, was the beauty.
Me?
I was the middle child who tried. That's what my mom used to say. Rachel tries. It was never enough to simply be. That year, I walked into my parents' house with a carefully wrapped box under my arm. Inside was a handmade photo album I'd spent months working on. Old photographs of our family, restored, decorated with handwritten notes, stories, and memories. I thought maybe, just maybe, this Christmas I could bridge the gap. Maybe my mom would see that my value wasn't measured in promotions or appearances or money. Maybe she'd see me. The living room was warm, the tree glittering with ornaments, the smell of cinnamon and roasted ham drifting through the air. Daniel was already there, telling stories about his recent trip to Italy. Claire sat on the sofa in a new silk dress, her nails perfectly manicured, laughing at his tales. And then there was my mother, her gaze sharp even before I took my coat off. "Rachel," she said, her voice clipped. "You're late." I glanced at the clock. I wasn't late. I was right on time. But arguing with her was useless, so I just smiled weakly and set the gift under the tree. Dinner passed in a blur. Conversations circled around Daniel's business and Claire's engagement. Nobody asked me about my job, about my life. I worked as a community center coordinator, organizing events, helping struggling families, making sure kids had after-school programs to keep them safe. It wasn't glamorous, and it didn't earn six figures, but it mattered to me. Still, in my mother's eyes, it wasn't worth mentioning. Then came the moment I'll never forget. After dinner, we gathered around the tree for gifts. Daniel handed out sleek, expensive watches. Claire gave everyone customized luxury scarves. My turn came, and I pushed the photo album across the floor toward my mom. She unwrapped it slowly, flipping through the pages with an unreadable expression. For a moment, hope flickered in me. Maybe she'd smile. Maybe she'd say thank you. Maybe she'd notice the hours I'd spent, the love I'd poured into every page. But instead, she closed the album, placed it on the coffee table, and said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "Well, what did I expect? Rachel always was the most useless child. While her siblings bring us real gifts, she shows up with this." The room froze. Daniel looked down. Claire pressed her lips together, almost hiding a smirk. And me? My heart shattered right there on the carpet, under the glow of the Christmas lights. I could feel the heat rise in my cheeks, the sting in my eyes. My own mother had reduced me to nothing, again, on a day meant for love. And for the first time in my life, I realized I couldn't just take it anymore. I opened my mouth, my voice trembling but growing steadier with each word. "Maybe it's time you hear the truth, Mom." And the room fell into silence. "Maybe it's time you hear the truth, Mom." The words slipped out before I had the chance to think them over. My voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the air like glass shattering. My mother blinked, surprised that I dared to speak up. Daniel shifted uncomfortably in his chair, and Claire leaned forward like she was settling in for a show. I could have backed down right there. I'd done it 100 times before. Bit my tongue, swallowed the hurt, pretended it didn't matter. But something in me had changed. Maybe it was the years of silence, maybe the sting of that final insult. Whatever it was, I wasn't going to sit there like a ghost in my own family anymore. "You've called me useless before," I said slowly, each word steady. "You've made it clear I'll never be Daniel or Claire. But do you even know what I do with my life? Do you even care?" My mother's lips tightened. "Don't start with the drama, Rachel. We're not doing this at Christmas." I laughed bitterly. Oh, Christmas is exactly when we're doing this. Because every year you find a way to remind me that I'll never measure up. And I've spent 35 years letting you convince me that I'm not enough. But you know what? I am. Her eyes narrowed, but I pressed on, my chest heaving as years of buried words finally clawed their way out. I may not bring luxury gifts from Paris, or wear gowns that cost more than my rent. But I make sure children have food when their parents can't provide. I organize drives so families don't freeze in winter. I sit with teenagers who think about ending their lives and remind them they're worth something. Does that sound useless to you? The silence that followed was thick, suffocating. Daniel looked up, his expression conflicted. Claire crossed her legs, her face unreadable. But my mother? She just scoffed, as if I were reciting some silly school project. Rachel, she said coldly, you've always had such a flair for exaggeration. You help a few people and think the world owes you praise. That's the problem with you. You want recognition for doing the bare minimum. Unlike your brother, who actually achieves things. My stomach dropped, but I steadied myself. I had expected this. I had lived this. And still the words stung. Achievements. I repeated, my tone sharper now. Is that what you call it? Daniel buys you expensive gifts, and that makes him the golden child? Claire shows up, looking beautiful, and that makes her your pride? And me, the one who actually works to make lives better, that makes me useless. My mother didn't answer. She didn't have to. Her silence was the answer. I looked down at the photo album resting on the coffee table, the gift I had poured my heart into. My fingers itched to grab it back, to protect it from her dismissal. Instead, I let it sit there like an open wound between us. You know what hurts the most? I whispered. My throat tightened, but I forced the words out. It's not that you don't see me. It's that you don't even want to. I've lived my whole life trying to make you proud, and nothing has ever been enough. Do you know what that does to a kid? To a grown woman? It makes you wonder why you even exist. The air in the room shifted. Daniel's eyes softened, and for the first time in years, I saw guilt flicker across his face. Claire looked away, suddenly fascinated by the ornaments on the tree. But my mother? She leaned back in her chair, arms crossed, her expression carved from stone. Don't be so dramatic, she said finally. You always were too sensitive. Maybe if you toughened up, you wouldn't feel so wounded all the time. I felt my hands tremble, but not with weakness, with anger. I had lived my whole life under the weight of her words, and now I realized something. The problem had never been me. It had always been her. I stood, my chair scraping loudly against the hardwood floor. My heart pounded as I looked her in the eye. You know what, Mom? Call me useless, all you want. But the truth is, I've done more for strangers than you've ever done for your own daughter. And maybe someday you'll realize that kindness, not money or beauty, is what makes a person valuable. Until then, I won't sit here and let you break me anymore. The room was silent again. Nobody moved. The twinkle of the Christmas lights seemed almost mocking as I stood there, breathing heavily, my pulse roaring in my ears. And then my mother whispered something that made my blood run cold. You'll regret speaking to me like that, Rachel. Mark my words, you'll regret it. You'll regret speaking to me like that, Rachel. Mark my words, you'll regret it. The words slithered through the room like poison. My mother's voice wasn't loud, but it carried the kind of weight that made everyone freeze. My chest tightened as if she'd just slammed a door in my face. For a moment, I wondered if I'd gone too far, if maybe I should have just swallowed my pride again. But then I reminded myself, no, this wasn't about regret. This was about truth. Daniel finally cleared his throat. Mom, maybe you shouldn't have said that. His voice was soft, almost cautious, as if he were testing the waters. My mother's had snapped toward him, eyes narrowing. Don't you start, Daniel. You've always understood what it means to achieve. You've never needed coddling. I almost laughed. Even now, she couldn't bring herself to admit she was wrong. Even when the whole room could see how far she'd gone. Claire shifted uncomfortably. Mom, it was a little harsh. It's Christmas, maybe we should. Enough? Evelyn snapped, her voice cracking through the air like a whip. I will not be lectured in my own home. If Rachel wants to play the victim, that's her choice. But I will not have this family ruined by her self-pity. My jaw clenched. Victim. That's what she thought of me? Not a daughter, not a woman who had spent her life searching for her mother's approval, but a victim. Something inside me hardened then, like a door slamming shut. I realized I wasn't going to win this battle, at least not in the way I had once hoped. My mother wasn't going to suddenly see me, suddenly love me the way I needed. And maybe I didn't need her to anymore. I grabbed my coat from the back of the chair. You know what, Mom? Merry Christmas. I hope you enjoy your perfect family without me. The words hung heavy in the air as I slipped my arms through the sleeves. My hands shook, but not from fear, from release. I had spent so many years tied to her opinion of me, and for the first time, I was cutting the rope. Daniel rose quickly. Rachel, wait. But I shook my head. No, Daniel.
Stay.
You belong here. I don't. I headed toward the door, the sound of my own heartbeat thundering in my ears. Behind me, I heard Claire mutter, Rachel, don't be so dramatic. But her voice faded as I opened the door, and the cold December air hit my face. Outside, the night was still. Snowflakes drifted lazily under the glow of the street lamp. I stood on the porch for a long moment, my breath visible in the freezing air, my heart pounding with equal parts pain and defiance. I thought about the photo album sitting abandoned on the coffee table, about the words my mother had chosen to throw at me, about the way my siblings had sat in silence for most of it, too afraid or too unwilling to stand up for me. For the first time in my life, I realized I was truly alone. But strangely, there was power in that. I walked down the icy steps and into the night, leaving the warmth of that house behind me. My boots crunched against the snow as I reached my car. I sat there for a while, staring at the windshield as the snowflakes melted into tiny droplets. My mother's voice echoed in my head. You'll regret it. But deep down I knew no, she was wrong. The only thing I regretted was not speaking up sooner. The days that followed were quiet, almost eerily so. My phone stayed silent. No calls from my mother. No texts from Daniel or Claire. Not even a half-hearted sorry or are you okay? It was as if I had been erased from the family entirely. I went to work at the community center, pouring myself into the holiday drives, the food donations, the children's Christmas party we hosted. The kids' laughter filled the empty spaces in my heart, their small hands clinging to mine as we decorated gingerbread houses and sang carols. With them, I felt more warmth, more family than I ever had in my parents' house. But when I went home at night, the silence returned. And so did the anger. Because the more I thought about it, the more I realized something. My mother hadn't just dismissed me. She had set the tone for everyone else to do the same. Daniel's silence, Claire's smirk, they weren't accidents. They were products of years of my mother telling them I was the lesser one, the one who didn't matter. And I was tired of it. Tired of being erased. Tired of being the punching bag. Tired of pretending I was okay. By New Year's Eve, I made myself a promise. I wasn't going to be quiet anymore. And if my mother wanted to call me useless, I was going to show her just how wrong she was, in a way she could never ignore. The first week of the new year was always the busiest at the community center. People came in with resolutions and requests, mothers needing food stamps, fathers desperate for work, teenagers looking for a safe place to spend their evenings. I threw myself into it with a kind of ferocity I didn't know I had. Every box of food I packed, every coat I handed out, every small hand I held reminded me that my life mattered. That I mattered. And slowly my mother's words, the most useless child, began to lose their sting. They still haunted me at night, but in the daylight, when I was surrounded by people who depended on me, I felt something new, a sense of worth that no one could take away. But at the same time, the silence from my family grew louder. No one reached out. Not Daniel, not Claire, and certainly not my mother. They went on with their perfect family photos, their dinners, their get-togethers, as if I had never existed. I saw glimpses of it online, Daniel posting about his latest business deal, Claire showing off her engagement ring at brunch, my mother smiling in group photos like nothing had ever happened. I would stare at those pictures and feel a familiar ache rise in my chest. But then I'd remember the little boy from the shelter hugging his donated teddy bear, or the single mother crying when I handed her grocery bags, and I'd think, if they can smile through their pain, so can I. Still, part of me longed for something more. Not revenge, not yet, but justice. A way to make my mother see that the child she dismissed as useless was building something far bigger than she could ever imagine. The chance came unexpectedly. In late January, I was approached by a local journalist. She had heard about the Christmas food drive we'd organized at the center, the one that made sure over 100 families had meals on their tables. She wanted to do a feature story on our work to highlight what the center was doing for the community. My first instinct was to say no. I never liked the spotlight. My mother had trained me to believe I wasn't worth it. But then I thought about her words, the way they had burned me to my core. And I thought, maybe this is how I answer her. So I agreed. The day of the interview, I wore a simple navy dress and brushed my hair back. The journalist asked me about the programs we ran, about the families we helped. I spoke with passion, my hands moving as I described the after-school tutoring, the free meals, the clothing drives, the holiday parties. And then she asked, "Why do you do this? What made you dedicate your life to helping others?" For a moment, I hesitated. Should I tell the truth? That it was because I'd spent my whole life feeling like I had nothing to offer? That every time my mother looked at me, I felt invisible? That helping others was the only way I ever felt like I mattered? I took a breath and smiled softly. Because everyone deserves to feel seen. Everyone deserves to know they're not useless. When the article was published, it spread quickly. The headline read, "One woman's mission to prove nobody is useless." My photo was there, smiling with a group of kids from the center. People from all over the city donated money, clothes, food. The center grew stronger than ever. And of course, my family saw it. Daniel called first. His voice was hesitant. "Hey, Rach. I saw the article. You're doing amazing things." Claire sent a short message. "Congrats on the story. Proud of you." But my mother? Silence. Not a word. And that silence told me everything I needed to know. She had seen it. She knew the world now saw value in the daughter she had dismissed. And for a woman like Evelyn, who lived on appearances and status, that silence wasn't just pride, it was anger. I could almost feel her seething through the void. And for the first time in my life, that thought made me smile. Because finally, I had given her something she couldn't ignore. And I wasn't done yet. The article didn't just fade away, it grew. Local radio stations invited me to speak about the center. Schools asked me to come talk to their students. Donations doubled, and families who had once been turned away for lack of resources were now finding help. Every time I walked into the community center, I felt a kind of strength I had never known before. For once in my life, I wasn't invisible. But still, there was one person who refused to see me. My mother. Weeks passed, and she said nothing. Not a single word. Not even a half-hearted text. But I knew she had read the article. Knew she had seen the photo of me standing tall with those kids. And I knew, deep down, that silence was her way of refusing to give me the one thing I'd always wanted, acknowledgement. Then one evening, Daniel called again. His tone was awkward, as though he had rehearsed the words. "Listen, Rachel," he said, "Mom's planning a family dinner. She wants everyone there, even you." I almost laughed. Even me? What an honor. "Rach, come on," he sighed. She's complicated. But maybe this is her way of extending an olive branch." An olive branch? Or a trap? Against my better judgment, I agreed. Not because I wanted her approval anymore, but because I was tired of running. If my mother wanted to test me, she'd find out that I wasn't the same timid child she had once crushed under her words. The dinner was set for the first weekend in February. I walked into my parents' house with my head high, my shoulders squared. The same house where I had been humiliated on Christmas Eve just weeks before. The smell of roast beef filled the air, the table was neatly set, and my mother sat at the head like a queen waiting for her subjects. Daniel and Claire were already there, their laughter forced, their eyes darting nervously between me and her. "Rachel," my mother said when I entered. Her tone was smooth, too smooth. "Thank you for coming." I met her gaze. "Of course." We sat down, the clinking of silverware the only sound for the first few minutes. Then, as if she had been waiting for her cue, my mother placed her fork down and looked at me. "I read the article," she said. The room went still. My heart skipped, but I kept my expression calm. "Did you?" "Yes," she replied, her tone dripping with something I couldn't quite place. Mockery. Maybe envy. Quite dramatic. "They made it sound like you're saving the world, when really, you just run a little center." There it was. The dismissal. The belittling. Daniel shifted in his seat, and Claire cleared her throat. But I didn't look at them. I kept my eyes locked on my mother. "It's not little," I said softly but firmly. "It matters." She smirked. "To who? A few children? A handful of families? Rachel, the world is bigger than your tiny circle of charity. You'll never understand real success." The words should have stung. Once upon a time, they would have shattered me.
But now?
Now they only made me angry. I leaned forward, my voice steady. "You're wrong. Real success isn't measured by money or things. It's measured by the lives you touch. And I've touched more lives than you could ever imagine. Do you know how many families had food because of that little center? How many children didn't go to bed hungry on Christmas? Hundreds. And I'd rather give a child one meal than buy 10 people a fancy scarf they don't need." Claire winced. Daniel looked at his plate, and my mother's smile faltered, just slightly. I pressed on, my words gathering strength. "You called me the most useless child at Christmas, in front of everyone. But tell me, who's really useless? The one who spends her life tearing people down, or the one who spends her life lifting people up?" Her face flushed, a crack appearing in the perfect mask she always wore. For the first time, I saw it: uncertainty. She opened her mouth, but no words came out. And in that silence, I felt something powerful. I wasn't the useless one. I never had been. And deep down I knew she knew it too. But before she could recover, before she could find her next insult, I said the words that silenced her completely. "You don't have to be proud of me, Mom, because I'm finally proud of myself." The words hung in the air like a thunderclap. "You don't have to be proud of me, Mom, because I'm finally proud of myself." For a second, I thought the ceiling might cave in from the silence that followed. My mother stared at me, her jaw tight, her eyes burning with the kind of fury she usually reserved for strangers who dared to cross her. Except now, I wasn't a stranger. I was her daughter. Daniel set his fork down slowly. His hands trembled just slightly as he looked between us. "Rachel's right," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. My mother's head snapped toward him. "Excuse me?" He cleared his throat, sat up straighter.
"She's right.
We've all treated her like she doesn't matter. But what she's doing, it matters more than what I'm doing, if we're being honest. I make money, sure, but she's changing lives." Hearing those words from Daniel, the golden child, the favorite, sent a shock through me. My chest tightened, my throat ached. I wanted to cry, but I held myself still. "Daniel," my mother hissed, "don't you dare put her on some pedestal. She has always been weak. Always. And weakness has no value in this world." I leaned forward, my voice sharp.
"No, Mom."
"You're wrong. Weakness is what you called it, but it's not weakness, it's compassion. And compassion is the only thing that's ever held this world together." Claire suddenly pushed her chair back with a screech. "Enough. Both of you." Her voice trembled as she looked at our mother. "Do you even hear yourself, Mom? You're tearing us apart. Every time we're together, you pit us against each other. Daniel the successful one, me the beautiful one, Rachel the useless one. It's like you enjoy it, watching us fight for scraps of your approval." My mother's face hardened. "Claire, don't be ridiculous." "No." Claire cut her off, her eyes shining with tears. I'm not ridiculous. I'm exhausted. Do you know what it's like to feel like your worth is based on how you look? To wonder if you'd matter at all if you didn't fit into your little mold of perfect beauty? You think I don't feel trapped? You think I don't see how you've poisoned all of us? I stared at Claire, stunned. My little sister, the one who had smirked at me on Christmas Eve, was finally speaking her truth. Daniel's hand tightened around his glass. She's right. You've controlled us for so long, Mom. You've made us believe we had to be perfect to matter. And Rachel was the only one brave enough to stand up to you. My mother's face flushed red, her hands trembling as she gripped the edge of the table. Ungrateful. All of you. I gave you everything. I raised you. And this is how you repay me? By turning on me? By siding with her? Her eyes locked on me, venomous. But this time, I didn't flinch. You didn't raise us, Mom. You raised an image. Daniel was your trophy, Claire was your doll, and I was the shadow you used to make them shine brighter. But I'm done being your shadow. Tears burned at the corners of my eyes, but I let them fall. Not from weakness, from release. Daniel reached across the table, placing his hand gently over mine. You're not useless, Rachel. You never were. I'm sorry it took me this long to say it. Claire's voice cracked as she added. Me too. I'm sorry. I looked at them both, my heart swelling and breaking all at once. After years of silence, years of swallowing my pain, here they were, finally seeing me, finally standing with me. But my mother? She pushed back from the table, her chair screeching across the floor. You'll regret this, she spat, her voice shaking with rage. All of you. You think you're strong without me? You're nothing without me. Nothing. And with that, she stormed out of the dining room, her heels clacking against the hardwood, the sound echoing long after she disappeared down the hall. For a moment, none of us moved. The only sound was the ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner. Then Daniel let out a shaky breath. I've never seen her like that. Claire nodded slowly. It's like she'd rather burn the family to ashes than admit she's wrong. I sat back, the weight of everything pressing down on me. My mother's words still stung, but they no longer defined me. For the first time in my life, I had something stronger than her approval. I had my own pride. And now I had my siblings. As I sat there between them, a strange thought took root in my mind. Maybe this wasn't just the end of my mother's control. Maybe it was the beginning of something better. But little did I know, she wasn't finished yet. And the next move she made would test everything we had just begun to rebuild. I wish I could tell you that dinner was the end. That my mother's fury fizzled into silence, and we all went on to rebuild our lives without her shadow. But people like Evelyn Morgan don't let go so easily. 2 weeks later, I found out just how far she was willing to go. It started with a phone call from the director of the community center. His voice was hesitant, almost nervous. Rachel, we've had some complaints. Someone's been spreading rumors, accusations about how the donations are being handled. They say money's going missing. My heart dropped. That's not true. You know that's not true. I do, he said quickly. But the board wants to investigate. They've received letters signed anonymously. I didn't need to guess who was behind it. My mother had always known how to wield her weapon of choice, words. And this time, she was aiming to destroy the only place where I'd built a life for myself. For days, whispers followed me through the halls of the center. Parents who once smiled at me now gave me wary glances. Volunteers who had worked beside me seemed distant. I stayed late, combing through records, gathering proof that every penny had been accounted for. And then the journalist who had written the original article reached out again. Rachel, I thought you should know, she said gently. Someone sent me an anonymous tip accusing you of fraud. I looked into it and frankly, it doesn't add up. But I thought you deserved to be warned. The anger that surged through me was hotter than anything I'd felt before. My mother hadn't just tried to break me with words this time. She was trying to rip apart everything I'd built, my work, my reputation, my dignity. I could have stayed quiet, fought it quietly behind the scenes. But something in me knew this was the moment to give her the reply she would never be able to twist, never be able to ignore. So I did something bold. At the next community fundraiser, with cameras flashing and the local paper in attendance, I stood on stage in front of everyone, donors, families, city officials, volunteers. My hands trembled at first, but when I looked out at the crowd, I saw faces that reminded me why I was there. Faces that mattered. I know there have been rumors, I began. My voice carried through the microphone, steady but charged with emotion. Rumors that I've stolen, that I've lied, that I've built this place on dishonesty. I won't pretend those words don't hurt, but I'll tell you this, they are lies. I held up a thick binder, the financial records, every receipt, every donation tracked. Here's the proof. Every dollar accounted for. Every donation used for what it was meant for. Feeding families, keeping children safe, giving hope where there was none. The crowd stirred, whispers rippling through the room. I took a breath, then spoke the words I had carried in my chest since Christmas. Someone once called me the most useless child. They said I would never achieve anything, that I would never matter. But I want you all to look around this room. Look at the families who have food. Look at the children who have a safe place to come after school. Look at the hope that lives here. If that's useless, then I will wear the word like a crown. The room erupted in applause. Not polite claps, but real, roaring applause that seemed to shake the walls. Parents stood. Volunteers cheered. And in that moment, I felt something I had never felt before. Undeniable worth. Later that night, as the story spread online and the video of my speech was shared hundreds of times, I received a message. From her. It was short. Just one line. You've embarrassed this family for the last time. I stared at the words on my phone, then let out a laugh, sharp, almost bitter, but free. Because the truth was, I hadn't embarrassed the family. I had freed it. Daniel and Claire called me the next morning. They told me they'd seen the speech, that they were proud, that they wanted to stand beside me in whatever came next. And my mother? She never showed her face at the community center. Never called again. For someone who thrived on control, silence was the only weapon she had left. And that silence, that silence was sweeter than anything I had ever heard. Because for the first time in 35 years, Evelyn Morgan had no reply. And I did. I'm not useless. I never was. And now the whole world knows it.